Hello friends, and welcome to you video number 2 of our course creating a database, a PostgreSQL database for our Flutter application. Before we start this talk about the database, let me draw your attention to one thing that we need to do and to check our structure of our project that we have built in video number 1. Now, to make sure that all the structure is working fine and there's no errors, we need to go to build and build project. If the build finished with no errors, that means our structure that we have made, all the dependencies that we have added are working fine. So, okay, as you can see, the build have been finished with no any errors, which means our structure for the project is fine. Having said that, let's carry on with the database creation. Now, this video consists of two things. The first thing is that you need to create a fully encrypted PostgreSQL database server. If you don't have one, you need to create one. And to create one, you need to go, if you have never created one before or you don't know how to create one, you need to go to this link on the YouTube, which is my course in there. And you can see here, these are 3 videos. Will teach you how you can create a fully encrypted PostgreSQL database server. So once you have done this, once you have completed this course, then you go back and carry on with this video. Then second thing is that we need to use an implementation of the PostgreSQL by, as I have said in the previous video, by getting this API, the Postgres API, and we can implement it in our application. Now, let's start with the database. Let us connect to our server, the PostgreSQL server, the fully encrypted PostgreSQL database server. So what we need to do is, this is the code that will connect us to our server. And if you are wondering from where we have got this code, it is all mentioned in the course. You can go back to this course, complete it, and then you'll understand how and we did this code. So let's start the server. Okay, server started. Now we need to create a database for our Flutter application. By default, PostgreSQL server have a default database and a default user by the name of Postgres. So you need to connect to that default user, and from there you can create whatever database you wish to your Flutter application. So let's connect to that default user. Again, this code also you can understand it fully from this course. So let's connect to the Postgres user. Now we have connected here. We need to create a database. So create database. We give it a name by, let's say, Flutter app DB. Okay, database have been created. Let's see if it's being created. As you can see here, this is the database. But there is one thing also you need to notice. This user is the admin of my machine, is the super user of my machine. We don't want this. We need to create a role. We need to create a user that will be the owner of this database. We don't want this super user or this admin of this machine to be the owner of the database. And the way to do that is to create role. Let's give it a name, Flutter app admin, with create DB, create role, login, replication, encrypted, and password. Now the password, you can select whichever password suitable for you. In my case, I choose this. Okay, now the role have been created. Now we need to make this role the owner of this database. So the way to do that is alter database Flutter app DB owner to Flutter app admin. Okay, now we have changed the ownership of the database to the role that we have just created. And the way to check this, again, you need to verify. So as you can see here, this database now owned by this row. Let's connect to the database. Okay, now the database is created and we can use it. Now let's go to the database manager and connect to the database. Now I'm using this database manager. You are free to use whichever database suitable for you. Let us connect. Now we are connected to the server and to the database. First thing we need to do is to create a schema. Schema being created. Second thing, we need to grant options to this row on this schema. And the grants will be on create usage. Okay. Fine. Then we need to revoke all privileges as a security, as a safety, for the safety. We need to revoke all the privileges from the schema public on all databases. We don't want any user on the public schema to access the other databases that we create in our schema. So this is as a safety feature. Okay, having done this, now let's move to the next step. The next step is that if you create a table in this schema and you want to change the ownership of this table to the role that we have just created, then you can do it this way. Alter table by any name, whichever name of the table, owner to the owner. But since we haven't done any table so far, so I will not go through this step. And then we need to grant this role all the grants, all the permissions to access all the tables in this schema. So this role will have all the permissions to access all the tables in this schema. And same with the sequences. Now I will tell you why it's important to grant this role the access to all sequences in this schema. If you don't do this, you will get an exception. Your database will not work, and I'll show you what is the sequence. Here we need to do these two lines for any new role that we can create in the future. We need to give it also the same permissions if you wish to do it. Now here we will create 4 tables: register, roles, authorities, and user data. By default we usually do this, we drop all these tables, although they are not being created, but it's just like a standard procedure. So we need to go through it. Okay. Next step is to create our table. Now as you can see, I have created many columns. It's totally up to you to create whichever column suitable for you for the registration process. For instance, I created columns for the company in DB, the email, password, and the name, first name, last name. The avatar, now we will save an avatar, which is an image of the user. The address of the user, country, whatever these things, the mobile number. The registration, also the registration date, and the login, which whenever the user login, we will timestamp it with a time zone. And then there are 2 things important: the role and the authorities. The roles and the authorities are important. You need to create them, because every user should have an authority and should have a role. The authority will let him access to your application. The roles will tell him which permissions he has to access to the database and manipulate the database. Now the status usually is active. You can create this if you have a subscription on your registration. So for instance, If your application requires a subscription and this subscription will expire, let's say, after 30 days, then you need to set at the beginning the status for 30 days for active, and after 30 days when the subscription expires, then the status will be not active. Now this only if you have a subscription, otherwise you don't need to use it. Now, few things to notice. First of all, in Postgres ID we use the serial. This is an auto increment. It's like the auto increment in MySQL. This serial is a sequence. It's a sequence, and that's why we give this row a permission to access all the sequence. Otherwise, it will not be able to access this table. So it's important to give this permission for this role to access all the sequences. The second thing is that we made the email as the primary key. Other thing is that we made the mobile as a unique column, and down the road you will know why I have made this column as a unique. Other thing is that you see here, this is a phone number. Usually for the numbers you use the integer, but from my readings on the Google manuals, they discourage you. It is not recommended to use an integer to save numbers in a Google application. So the best way to do that is that you use a domain. The domain, you can get all the details about it with this manual of Postgres manual, which SQL create domain. The domain is, in general, it gives you a more control over the data that will be persisted in the column. So you can like another checking layer on the data. For instance, now we need to save numbers, mobile numbers. So here we will put a regex to check when the user enter his mobile number in the application. When it's sent to the backend, to the server, it will be checked here again. It should have this sequence so it can be persisted. So the mobile number can be persisted. Otherwise it will be rejected. And now the domains, you can use them in many other things. You can for the text. Also you can use a domain for any other things. You can also make use of the domain to control the data that will be persisted on any column. So now to create the table, we need first to create the domain, and then we change the ownership of this domain to the role that we have created. And now we can create the table, the register table. Okay, having done this, let's see if it is being created. No data, it's being created. Now we need to create two tables, the roles and the authorities. And you need to populate them with data. The roles is totally depends on your selection, on your requirement for your app. For instance, in this tutorial, in this example, I selected role admin, role user, role DB manager. It's totally up to you to select whichever roles suitable for your need, and as well as for the authorities also. As you can see here, the user authority can only look into the app. The DB manager can manipulate the database. The change password authority, that's when a user forgot his password. So you need to give him the permission to access to the database to change only the password. So it's a specific authority to change only the password. So this is the authorities you need, and also it's totally up to you to select whichever authority is suitable for you. Final thing which we will talk about is the indexes. Now, as you may know, the indexes are a very powerful tool that will enhance the performance and the speed of your queries. And there is no database, I believe there is no database without an indexes. So for instance, in our table, which is the register table, usually when the user login, the query will check about the email, directly will go to the email. So we will select the email as an index. That's very obvious. And we also will check the mobile number to see if this mobile number is registered or no. So again, the mobile number will put it as an index in this index, included in this index. Now this process enhance the performance of your database, enhance the reach of the query to the data more faster and more efficiently. So the indexes are very powerful tool and you have to use them. So the create index concurrently, this is the name of the index on the schema and the table name, and whichever column you think will enhance your database performance. Okay, this is all about the database, which is the second part. And for next video, we'll start doing the UI for our simple application, for our simple Flutter application. And we will do the login form, register form, and update form. And we will connect the application to this database through the models, and we will start persisting data into the database. Thank you very much.